You quit. You will not say it out loud, but you know it is true. You got close, closer than you have ever been, and then you walked away from the thing you wanted most. You tell yourself you ran out of time. You ran out of money. The situation changed. The timing was wrong. Life got in the way. But underneath all of it, in the place you do not visit often, you know what really happened. It got dark, and it got hard, and you were tired, and you stopped. You have done this more than once. There is a whole graveyard inside you of things you almost finished. The business that was 3 months from working, the body that was halfway built, the book at 60 pages, the skill you practiced until you were nearly good and then never touched again, the relationship you abandoned the moment it asked something hard of you. You are not a person who never tries. That is what makes it hurt. You are a person who tries, and tries well, and then quits one single step before the door finally opens. And the cruelest part is the timing of it. You never quit at the start, when quitting would cost you nothing, when you have invested nothing, and walking away is clean. You quit near the end. You quit after you have already paid almost the whole price, right before the reward, in the exact narrow stretch where every important thing in a human life is won or lost. You pay and pay and pay, and then you leave the moment before you would have collected. By the end of this, you will know why you keep quitting in that one specific place. You will know the single secret a samurai used to keep rising when every reason on earth, every honest and reasonable reason, told him to stay down in the dirt and let it end. And you will understand, finally, that the people who finish things are not the ones who never fall. They are something else entirely, something far more ordinary and far more within your reach, and you have misunderstood them your whole life. 400 years ago, in a country of iron winters and longer wars, a man knelt in mud he was certain would be his grave. He had been beaten lower than you have ever been beaten. He had less left than you have ever had left. And what he did in that mud, with a wound across his chest and no good reason remaining, is the exact answer you have been missing in every grave you ever dug. So listen closely, because the secret is older than you think and far smaller than you hope, and it asks of you only one thing. If something here begins to land in you, a quiet like helps another tired soul find this same fire. Share in the comments the one thing you quit that you still think about late at night. Do not hold back. Someone reading this needs to know they are not the only one who left something they loved. And if you want more of this, walk with this channel a while longer. His name was Katsuro, and he was a ronin, a masterless sword in a land that had no more use for men like him. He had attached himself to a small mountain outpost, a rough wooden fort holding a narrow pass that a much larger army wanted badly. There were 40 men inside those walls. Outside there were 2,000, and every man inside knew, in the way men know a thing without ever saying it aloud, that the walls would not hold, that the numbers did not lie, that the ending was already written. You know this feeling. The exact moment you do the math, and the math says you lose. The moment the gap between where you stand and where you want to be looks so wide, so impossibly wide, that something in your chest just quietly sits down and stops arguing. That is the moment, every single time, that the quitting truly begins. Not with a decision you could point to, with a calculation you never spoke aloud. The body surrenders long before the mouth admits it. The siege began the way these things begin, with arrows and fire, and the long screaming of the first assault against the gate. And the men of the outpost fought, and the wall held that day, and they breathed in the dark afterward, and they let themselves think, perhaps. And then the second day came, and the third, and the enemy did not leave, because the enemy did not need to leave. The enemy only needed to wait and to wear them down, one assault at a time, the way the world wears you down, not with one great clean blow you could brace against, but with the endless gray grind of days that simply do not end. By the seventh day, the outpost was breaking, not the walls, the men. A wall can be repaired in a night. What was breaking was the thing inside each man that had said, on the first morning, "We can do this." That thing was bleeding out slowly, silently, and Katsuro watched it leave the eyes of the men around him, one by one. The same way you have watched it leave your own eyes in a mirror near the end of something hard. The hope does not die loudly, it just goes quiet, and then it is gone. And this is the very heart of what I have to tell you, so hold it. Because near the end of that seventh day, in the worst of the fighting, Katsuro was struck. A blade caught him across the chest and threw him backward into the cold, churned mud of the courtyard. And he lay there, looking up at a flat gray sky, and for the first time in his entire life the thought came to him clean and simple and almost unbearably sweet. Stay down. No one would ever blame you. You have given more than enough. Stay down, and let the cold come, and let it finally be over. You have heard this exact voice. You hear it near the end of everything hard you have ever attempted. And notice when it comes, because the timing is the trick of it. It does not arrive at the beginning, when you are fresh and full and the fire is high. It is far too clever for that. It waits. It is endlessly patient. It comes only when you are most spent, when you have already paid the most and have the very least left to give. And then it always says the same gentle, reasonable, almost loving thing. You have done enough. No one would blame you. This is a fine and honorable place to stop. What happened next is the secret itself, and I want you to hold it carefully, because it is not what you expect, and it is the whole of why a few men finish and most men do not. Katsuro did not feel a surge of strength rise in him. He did not suddenly remember some great reason to live. No fire returned to his chest, no vision of glory, no second wind. There was nothing of the kind. He simply moved one hand. He turned it over in the mud and pressed the palm flat against the cold ground and pushed and rose. Not because he wanted to rise. He did not want to. He rose because rising was the only single thing he had not yet quit. There was an old man in his village, dead many years now, who had taught him one line as a boy, and it came back to him there in the freezing mud, not as inspiration, never as inspiration, but as plain instruction. Fall 7 times. Rise 8. The old man had made him repeat it 1,000 times, until the words meant nothing at all, until they were just a sound. And now, when everything else in the world meant nothing, that worn and emptied sound was the only thing left that still somehow meant something. Fall 7. Rise 8. Katsuro called it, in the silence of his own breaking mind, the 8th rising, and he did not understand it yet, not truly. He only obeyed it. Stop here, because this is you, and you have been getting this exactly backward your entire life. You think the people who never quit are the people who never fall. You picture them as steady, unshaken, unbroken, carried forward by some deep reserve of strength that you were simply not issued at birth. So when you fall, when the 7th blow finally lands, and you go down into your own mud, you take the falling itself as the proof that you are not one of them. You read the fall as the disqualification, as the verdict, as the moment the universe quietly confirms what you always feared, that you are not built to finish. It is not. Falling is not the disqualification. Falling is the entire game. Hear the arithmetic hidden inside the old man's line, because it is far more precise than it sounds. Fall 7, rise 8. Count it slowly. To rise 8 separate times, you must have first fallen at least 7. The rising is always one more than the falling. That is the whole structure of it. The man who finishes is not the man who was never knocked down, because there is no such man and there never has been. He is the man who, every single time, without exception, stood up exactly one more time than the world put him down. That is the only difference between him and the men in the graveyard. It was never about staying on your feet. It was about what you choose to do while your face is in the dirt. You have been quitting because you believed the falling meant something it has never meant. You fell at 60 pages, and you thought, this proves I was never really a writer. You fell 3 months from profit, and you thought, this proves the business was a fantasy from the start. You took each fall as a final verdict on who you are. But a fall is not a verdict. A fall is only a question, and the question is always the same, and it has only one answer that has ever mattered. Will you rise? Katsuro answered it with one muddy hand pressed flat against the frozen earth. That is the whole of the secret. One more rising than your falling. Nothing grander, nothing else. But there was a second man inside that outpost, and I have to tell you about him, because he is the warning, and you need the warning every bit as much as you need the rule. His name was Toma, and he was without question the strongest fighter on that wall. Where Katsuro was scarred and weathered and entirely ordinary, Toma was magnificent to watch. His sword was the fastest, his footing the surest, his arm the strongest. In the first bright days of the siege, when the fighting still felt grand and the cause still felt holy, Toma was the hero of that wall. Men rallied to him without being asked. He stood in the worst breaches and held them alone, and when he laughed in the very face of the enemy below, the others found their own courage somewhere inside his laughter. You know a Toma. Perhaps in some season of your own life you have been one, the one who is dazzling when the work is new and exciting, the one who blazes at the start of every fresh thing, the new business, the new diet, the new plan, the new January, burning so bright and so hot that everyone watching is certain, this time, for this person, it will surely last. Toma had everything Katsuro lacked, everything in the world but the one single thing that actually finishes a siege, because Toma had never once learned how to fall. He had won so easily, so often, for so long, that he had no practice at all in being beaten. His gift had carried him over every obstacle of his life so smoothly that he had never been forced to discover what he would do when the gift ran out. And on the 7th day, when the cause stopped feeling grand and became only grim, when there was no glory left in the work and no crowd left to laugh for, Toma met at last a thing his gift had never prepared him to face. He fell. He fell like any other man, and having absolutely no practice at rising, he simply did not. He stayed down. By the cold of the 8th day he was gone, over the back wall in the dark and into the trees, the strongest man in the entire fort, the very first to leave, broken completely by the exact thing the old man's small line had been built across centuries to survive. Let that settle all the way down into you, because it overturns a lie you have carried since you were a child. You think the ones who finish are the gifted ones, the strong ones, the talented ones, the ones for whom it always came easy. They are not. Look closely, and they almost never are. The ones who finish are the ones who learned to fall and rise, so many uncounted times that falling slowly lost its power to end them. And the gifted, the brilliant, the ones who never had to learn this because their talent spared them the mud, are so often the very ones who vanish without a sound the first time the work turns gray and the applause goes quiet. You do not lack the gift to finish. Hear that. You lack the practice of rising, and you have spent your whole life mistaking that lack for a flaw in your blood. So Katsuro rose on the 7th day with a wound torn across his chest, and the men around him saw him do it. And they did not see a stronger man. They had all seen stronger. They had followed stronger in Toma, right up until he ran. What they saw instead was an ordinary man, badly hurt, getting up at the precise moment when getting up made no sense at all. And something about that reached into them in a way that all of Toma's brilliance never had. Because a man cannot truly follow strength he does not himself possess. It only shames him. But every exhausted man in that mud could follow a rising, because every man in that mud already knew intimately how to fall. This is the second thing the secret teaches, and almost no one ever understands it. Your rising is never only your own. The people all around you are also lying in the mud. They are also hearing the same gentle voice telling them to stay down. They are also waiting, in silence, to see if rising is even possible for a person in their condition. And when you rise, you do not only save yourself, you become the proof, in front of their eyes, that it can be done. The quietest, most ordinary act of getting up one more time is the single most contagious thing a human being is capable of. You have spent years waiting for some leader to appear and pull you to your feet. You were always meant to be that rising for someone else. Now hear the part of the secret that will frighten you a little before it sets you free. Katsuro did not rise only once. The wall did not hold because of one beautiful, heroic moment that the bards could sing about. He rose on the 7th day, and the enemy poured against the gate again on the 8th, and he was thrown down again, hard, and he rose again. And the 9th day, and the 10th. The 8th rising was never a single act of courage. It was a discipline. It was the plain practice of always rising one more time than he was felled, repeated until he genuinely lost count of both numbers, repeated long after every feeling that could have fueled it was gone, repeated as nothing more than a flat fact of the man he had decided once to be. This is exactly why you have misunderstood persistence your whole life. You have been waiting every single time to feel determined. You stand at the edge of the hard thing, freshly fallen, and you wait for some surge of will to come and lift you. And when it does not come, when the feeling simply refuses to arrive, you take its absence as honest permission to stay down. But Katsuro felt no surge. The men who finish almost never do. They have simply stopped requiring a feeling in order to move. They rise the way the sun rises over the mountains, without first consulting how it feels about the morning, without waiting to be inspired by the dawn. They have made rising a thing they do, not a thing they feel. And there is a harder test still, one the siege held for Katsuro that no one ever warns you about, the one that decides everything. It is easy, relatively easy, to rise when the enemy is at the gate and the other men are watching and there is glory in being seen to stand. But there came nights in that long siege when the assault was over, when the enemy had pulled back to their fires, when the courtyard was dark and silent and every other man was asleep, and Katsuro was alone with a wound that would not close and a body that wanted only to lie still until morning. No one was watching in those hours. No one would ever know if he simply lay there and let himself sink. And it was in exactly those unwatched hours, with no audience and no glory and no enemy to make a hero of him, that the true rising had to happen, the small private one, the one where he made himself stand and tend the wall and check the gate because he had decided to be a man who rises and not a man who only performs rising when there are eyes upon him. This is you, and it is the part of you that you hide from everyone. It is easy to keep going when someone is watching, when there is a deadline with your name on it, when other people are counting on you and would see you fall. The hard rising is the one no one will ever grade. It is the page you write when no one asked for it and no one would notice if it never came. It is the training you do in an empty room on a day no one would know you skipped. It is the quiet, unwitnessed getting up, alone, in the dark, that no story will ever be told about. And that is the only rising that builds a man who finishes, because the world spends most of its hours not watching you at all, and the things that matter most are built almost entirely in those unwatched hours. And here is what no one ever told you about the specific place where you keep quitting. You always quit near the end, and you have always assumed this was a coincidence, or a personal flaw in your timing, or simple bad luck. It is none of those things. You quit near the end because the end is precisely where the falling is worst. The enemy of every great thing saves its very hardest blows for the final stretch, deliberately, because the final stretch is where the most people break. And it knows this better than you do. The last mile is the steepest by design, not by accident. The darkness is always thickest in the hour just before a thing finally gives way and the light comes through. You have been reading the brutal difficulty of the ending as a sign to stop, when in plain truth it is the surest possible sign that you are very nearly through the wall. Think hard about what this means for every grave inside you. The business 3 months from working was not failing. It was at its 7th fall, the one that comes right before the 8th rising, the exact place where the work is hardest and the reward is nearest, and almost every living soul lets go of the rope. The book abandoned at 60 pages, the body left halfway built. You did not quit those things because they were impossible. You quit them because you reached the precise stretch where finishing demanded the most risings of you. And no one had ever taught you that the most risings of all are always required right before the wall finally holds and the army outside turns and goes home. So the siege wore on, and I will not pretend to you that it became easy, because the secret has no easy anywhere inside it, and any voice promising you easy is lying. The outpost did not win through brilliance or genius or some clever stroke. It won through arithmetic and nothing else. Every single day the enemy knocked the men down into the mud, and every single day a few more of them, watching Katsuro do it, learned to turn a hand over and press the palm flat against the earth and rise. And so an army of 2,000 seasoned soldiers slowly discovered the one thing in all the world it could not defeat. It could fell these men. That was never in doubt. What it could not do was make them stay down. And there is no victory anywhere against an enemy who treats every fall as nothing more than the small, dark thing that happens just before the next rising. On the 19th day, the larger army broke its own siege and withdrew down the mountain, beaten not by strength, never by strength, but by 40 ordinary men who simply, stubbornly, would not stop getting up. Let me leave the mountain now, and the mud, and the Ronin who lived to become an old man telling boys a single worn line. Let me speak only to you, because the siege was never once the point. You were always the point. You, and the mud you are lying in at this very moment, and the gentle voice in your ear telling you that you have surely done enough. Here is what to do, and I want you to feel how plain and unglamorous it is, because that plainness is the whole reason it works, and also the whole reason you have ignored it for so long. Stop trying to never fall. You will fall. You fell at 60 pages, and you will fall again, at 90, at 200, at the very last page if it comes to it. The falling is not the problem, and was never once the problem. So change the only number that has ever actually mattered. Make your risings one more than your falls. That is the entire secret, start to finish. That is all Katsuro ever had. One more rising than his falling, every single time, with a muddy hand and no good feeling anywhere to support it. And when the voice comes, and it will come, near the end, when you are most spent and have the least left, saying you have done enough and no one would blame you, you will recognize it now for exactly what it is. It is not wisdom. It is not your body's honest and final limit. It is the precise lie that arrives at the precise moment most people quit, and it always wears the kindest, most reasonable voice it owns, because the kind voice is the one that works. You do not have to win an argument against it. You will not win that argument near the end. You only have to do what Katsuro did, which is to move one hand and press it flat and rise before the kind voice has even finished being reasonable. And you will find the mud is everywhere, because the falling is everywhere. It is in the gray morning you wake with no fire at all for the thing you swore to build. Rise anyway. It is in the rejection that lands hard on the work you bled into for a year. Rise anyway. It is in the month the numbers all run backward, and every honest sign says, stop now. Rise anyway. It is in the friend who left, the plan that collapsed, the year that took far more from you than it ever gave back. Every one of these is the same mud. Every one of these is answered the same single way. You are not learning 100 different kinds of courage. You are learning one rising, and performing it one more time than the world performs your falling. And understand the world you are trying to rise inside of, because it is not the mountain, and in one way it is far more dangerous than the mountain ever was. On the mountain, the falling was honest. A blade struck you and you went down and everyone could see it, and there was no shame in needing to rise. The world you live in fells you more quietly than that. It does not knock you flat with steel. It simply offers you, at every hour of every day, a soft and frictionless reason to stay down that you do not even have to call quitting. A screen to drift into. A pleasure that costs nothing and asks nothing, and gives you, for a moment, the exact feeling of being fine. The world does not demand that you surrender. It only makes lying in the mud so comfortable that you forget you ever meant to rise at all. Katsuro had it easier in this one way. His enemy wanted him dead, and that is a thing a man can fight. Your enemy only wants you comfortable, and a comfortable man almost never notices the moment he stopped getting up. So you must do for yourself what the cold mountain did for him. You must make the rising a decision you make on purpose, again and again, against a world engineered to make you forget the rising was ever needed. No one is going to strike you and force the choice. The choice will come dressed as an ordinary evening, a tired feeling, a small and reasonable surrender that looks like nothing at all. And in that ordinary moment, you will press your hand to the ground, or you will not. And a year of those moments is the entire difference between the man in the graveyard and the man who finally stands. You will want, on certain days, to count up your falls, and let the size of the number crush you flat. Do not. The old man's line never asks you to fall fewer times. It does not promise you a soft road or a short siege or a kind enemy. It promises you only this one thing, that as long as your rising stays one single step ahead of your falling, you cannot be finished, no matter how many times you go down, no matter how grand and how endless the army outside the walls. A man who treats every fall as nothing more than the thing that comes before the next rising is, in the only way that has ever mattered, undefeatable. Not because he is strong, he may not be strong at all, because he flatly refuses to let falling mean the end. Hear me on the failing, because this is the part that will actually save you. You will fall badly. You will fall in ways that feel utterly final, that feel like undeniable proof, that feel like the world itself bending close to tell you to quit and stay quit. Katsuro fell with a blade laid open across his chest into freezing mud he was certain was his grave, and even that was not the end, because he did not let the worst fall of his entire life become the verdict on his entire life. The fall is never the verdict. The staying down is the verdict, and the staying down is the one single thing in this whole story, the only thing that was ever entirely and completely your own free choice. And slowly, in acts so small and so ordinary that you will be almost ashamed to call them brave, the man inside you will begin to change. You will fall and rise and fall and rise and fall and rise, and one ordinary day you will notice, almost in passing, that the falling no longer frightens you the way it once did, because you have now proven to yourself 100 separate times in the mud that you always rise. The voice that says stay down will grow quieter, not because it ever truly dies. It does not die, but because you have simply stopped obeying it, and a voice you never once obey eventually stops expecting to be heard at all. You will become the man the army of 2,000 could not beat, not unbreakable, something far better and far more human than unbreakable, simply unwilling to stay broken. Imagine yourself 1 year from tonight, standing and looking back at that whole graveyard of almost finished things, and seeing one of them, just one, no longer lying in the grave. One single thing you fell at, and rose at, and fell at again, and rose at again, until it finally stood up on its own and held. Picture it actually finished. Not because the road ever got easy, because it did not. Not because you stopped falling, because you never stopped falling. Finished only because for one stretch of your one life you managed to keep your risings one number ahead of your falls, and that, it turns out, after everything, is the only thing that finishing has ever once required of anyone. That man is not a fantasy, and not a stranger. He is 3 feet away from you right now, lying in the very same mud you are lying in, with one hand still free to press against the ground. That is the samurai secret to never giving up. Not strength you were born with, or cruelly denied at birth. Not a feeling that comes to lift you near the end, because it does not come, and it was never once going to come. Fall 7. Rise 8. One more rising than your falling, performed in the very worst of the mud, before the gentle and reasonable voice can finish telling you that this, here, is a fine and honorable place to stop. You quit. You remember every one of the things you left, all of them so much closer to the door than you ever let yourself believe at the time. The only question left now is the one you have been quietly avoiding your entire life. The next time you fall, near the end, in the dark, with every reasonable reason on earth to stay down, How many times will you rise? One more than you fall. That is the whole of it. That is the entire distance, the only distance there ever was between the graveyard inside you and the one thing at last that finally stands. Not 7 fewer falls, not a stronger heart, or a softer road, or a kinder year, or a feeling that finally arrives to carry you. Only one more rising than you're falling, kept up past the point where every reasonable man around you has already let go of the rope and gone home to the warm and quiet comfort of giving up. Press your hand into the ground. Rise.